You are going to die. Not today, probably not this year, but someday everything you are, every excuse you've rehearsed, every "I'll start Monday," every smaller version of yourself you kept safe because it felt easier than the alternative, all of it ends. The house, the applause you were waiting for, the apology you were sure you still had time to make. Gone, same as everyone else's. That's not meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up, because most people spend their entire lives running from that sentence instead of letting it clarify anything. 2,500 years ago, 300 men stopped running from it. And in doing that, they understood something most people alive today will go their whole lives without learning. The difference between a wasted life and a legendary one was never talent. It was never luck. It wasn't even courage. Not really. Courage is just what discipline looks like from the outside. The real difference was the willingness to stand in one exact spot, when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to run, and hold it anyway. They held a narrow strip of rock between a mountain and the sea. You are being asked to hold something too. The only difference is, nobody is going to carve your name into stone if you don't. Nobody is even going to notice. You'll just quietly become someone who almost did something, and you'll never fully know what it cost you. So let's talk about what holding actually looks like, and why almost nobody does it. Let's talk about you for a second. Not the version of you that shows up in the mirror after a good night's sleep and a small win. The other one. The one who knows exactly what needs to happen, has known for months, maybe years, and finds a reason not to do it anyway, and somehow makes that reason sound completely rational every single time. The alarm goes off at 5, and some quiet, reasonable-sounding voice says just 10 more minutes, and you believe it, because it always sounds so reasonable in the moment. 10 minutes becomes an entire version of your life you never got around to building. Not through one dramatic failure, through 10,000 reasonable-sounding surrenders, stacked so quietly on top of each other that you never noticed the pile until it was the size of a decade. The idea you've had for 3 years, the one you only bring up at dinner after a drink, when you're feeling brave enough to say it out loud. You still haven't started it, not because you don't know how, because starting means there's a real chance it fails where people can see it, and staying quiet feels safer than being watched while you try. The conversation you need to have with your father, your partner, yourself in the mirror, that you keep rescheduling in your head, because some part of you has quietly decided that almost saying it is close enough to count. The body you keep meaning to take care of, the relationship you keep meaning to repair, the version of your work you keep meaning to actually finish, instead of the version you keep meaning to start over on next week, with a better plan, once things finally calm down. Here's the truth almost nobody says to you directly. None of that makes you weak. It makes you completely, unremarkably normal. Comfort is the most seductive enemy a person will ever face, precisely because it never announces itself as the enemy. It shows up disguised as rest, as just this once, as I've earned a break. It never once knocks wearing a sign that says I am the reason you'll look back on this decade with regret. It just quietly, reasonably, one excuse at a time, takes everything. And most people go their entire lives never realizing that the version of them capable of holding a line simply never got built. Not because they lacked the raw material for it, because nobody ever trained it, including them. 300 men, on the other hand, had been training it since they were 7 years old. To understand what happened at that mountain pass, you have to understand what happened decades earlier, in a city that had organized its entire existence around one uncomfortable idea. That ease was the enemy of the people, so they would remove ease from their own children on purpose, long before the world ever got the chance to do it for them. At 7 years old, a Spartan boy was taken from his mother and placed into a training system called the Agoge, and it had exactly one job: build a human being who could not be broken by anything the world would later throw at him. He wasn't raised in a household anymore. He was raised in a pack, alongside other boys his age, because Sparta had decided that a man who could only function with his mother's comfort nearby was a man who would fold the first moment real comfort wasn't available. He learned to go hungry on purpose, in controlled doses, because a soldier who has never once felt real hunger panics the first time his rations run out in the field, and panic kills faster than any enemy does. He learned to endure cold with almost nothing to protect him from it, because a soldier who has never been cold breaks on the first night he has to sleep exposed to it. He was taught, deliberately and repeatedly, to fail in front of other people and keep functioning anyway, because the battlefield does not pause to let your ego recover. And neither, it turns out, does anything else in life that's actually worth doing. Was it brutal? Yes. History doesn't need to romanticize that part for the lesson underneath it to still hold. But understand what they were actually building, piece by piece, for over a decade. By the time a Spartan man held a shield in a real battle for the very first time, he had already survived 1,000 small deaths of comfort, ego, and complaint, in private, where nobody was watching and nobody was going to give him any credit for it. The real battle, when it finally came, wasn't going to be the hardest thing he had ever done. It was simply going to be the most important one. That is what discipline actually is, underneath all the noise people make about motivation. It is not a burst of inspiration on a Monday morning that quietly fades out by Wednesday. It is repetition, practiced so many times, in rooms nobody else ever sees, that when the real test finally arrives in public, your body already knows exactly what to do before your fear has had time to say a single word. Keep that in mind, because it explains everything that happens next. In 480 BC, a Persian king named Xerxes marched south into Greece with an army so vast that ancient writers swore it drank entire rivers dry as it passed through the land. Whatever the real number actually was, historians still argue about it today. One thing was never in dispute. No army Greece could raise would ever be large enough to meet that force head-on, in open ground, and survive the encounter. So a Spartan king named Leonidas did something that should sound familiar to you, because you are going to need to do it too, just at a much smaller scale. He didn't go looking for a place where he was strong. He went looking for a place where the enemy's size would stop mattering. He found it at a narrow gap between a mountain wall and the sea, so tight in places that only a handful of men could stand shoulder to shoulder at once. The locals called it Thermopylae, the hot gates. Leonidas brought 300 Spartans, along with several thousand allied Greeks from other cities who chose to stand there with them, and they made their position in that gap, because in that gap, and only in that gap, numbers stopped deciding the outcome. Discipline did. There's a detail from that time most retellings skip, and it tells you more about what you're actually dealing with than almost anything else in the story. Before the fighting even began, Xerxes sent a scout ahead to look at the Spartan position. The scout came back and reported something strange. The Spartans weren't preparing for battle at all. They were exercising, combing their long hair, behaving from a distance like men with absolutely nothing on their minds. Xerxes had an exiled Spartan king traveling in his own court, a man named Demaratus, and he asked him what it meant. Demaratus told him the truth, and Xerxes didn't believe a word of it. That's simply what Spartans do before they expect to die. They groom themselves like it's any other ordinary morning because panic is a choice, and they had trained themselves out of making it. When Xerxes finally sent word demanding the Greeks lay down their weapons, The answer that came back, the 2 words history still remembers, was simple. Come and take them. For 2 full days, wave after wave of the finest soldiers in the Persian Empire were thrown against that wall of shields and spears, including, eventually, the king's own elite guard, soldiers known as the Immortals, a name given to them because their ranks were always instantly refilled the moment a man fell, so that from a distance, it looked as though they could not be killed at all. Against the Spartan wall, they broke exactly like everyone else had. Rank after rank sent forward. Rank after rank falling back. The narrow pass choking with more Persian dead than Xerxes could afford to explain to himself. At one point, a soldier warned the Spartans that the sheer number of Persian arrows about to be fired would be so massive it would blot out the sun. One of the men in that line, a Spartan named Dinex, is said to have answered without missing a breath, "Good, then we'll fight in the shade." Listen closely, because this is the part almost everyone gets wrong. That line isn't arrogance. That's a man who has trained so completely for so many years that fear no longer has anywhere left in him to attach itself. He isn't pretending he's unafraid. He built something, deliberately over a decade, that fear simply cannot get all the way through anymore. But here's the part of the story most versions leave out entirely, and it's the part that matters most for you. On the 3rd day, a local man named Ephialtes, hoping for a reward from the Persians, revealed a hidden mountain path that curled around behind the Greek position. Leonidas found out they were about to be completely surrounded, attacked from the front and the rear at once, with no way out and no realistic way to win. In that exact moment, he had every justification in the world to retreat. Nobody would have called it cowardice. He had already held one of history's largest armies back for 2 full days. He had already done more than anyone could have reasonably asked of one man. Instead, he sent almost all of the allied Greek soldiers home, not in surrender but on purpose, to keep them alive for the battles Greece was still going to need them for. And then he stayed. Along with his 300 Spartans, roughly 700 soldiers from the city of Thespeae chose to stay and die beside them, fully understanding what staying now meant. They weren't trying to win the battle anymore. They already knew they couldn't. They stayed to buy time, a handful of hours, maybe one more day, so the rest of Greece would have a chance to prepare for what was coming down that road behind them. On the final morning, surrounded on every side, they fought first with spears until the spears broke, then with swords until the accounts say even the swords broke. Then, according to what survives, with their bare hands and their teeth, because retreating was no longer a decision any of them were willing to make. Every single one of them died on that ground. And here is what almost nobody tells you about Thermopylae, the part that should completely change how you think about every hard thing you are currently avoiding. By any conventional measure, they lost. The pass fell that same day. Xerxes marched his army through exactly where they had been standing. If you were only counting the battle itself, 300 men and the Thespians who stood with them died for absolutely nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. Word of what they had done, that a small, hopelessly outnumbered force had held one of the largest armies in human history to a standstill for the better part of a week, spread across Greece faster than the Persian army itself could march. It didn't just buy a few days. It changed what an entire terrified civilization believed was actually possible. Cities that had already been quietly preparing to surrender chose to fight instead. A year later at Salamis, and then at Plataea, the combined Greek forces broke Xerxes' invasion for good, built, in no small part, on the belief that 300 men had proven. At a mountain pass, nobody expected them to survive, that this enemy could be stood against at all. Afterward, they carved words into stone at that site. Historians still debate the exact translation, but the meaning of it, at its core, was something close to this. Tell the people back home that we did exactly what was asked of us here to the very end, and we never once bent the knee to do it. That's the story. Now let's talk about your pass. You are not being asked to die at a mountain pass, but you are being asked, right now, today, to hold a line of your own, and almost nobody ever does, because nobody ever tells them clearly enough that it's the exact same fight, just fought at a much smaller, quieter scale, with no music playing and nothing carved into stone afterward. Maybe your pass is a 5 a.m. alarm and a gym membership you've paid for and barely used in a year. Maybe it's the business idea you've talked about since you were 25, while people no smarter than you, no more talented than you, started theirs anyway and are now 3, 5, 10 years further down a road you're still standing at the entrance of. Maybe it's a substance you need to put down completely, not cut back on, not handle better, down for good. Maybe it's an apology that's been sitting unsent in your head for months, maybe years, getting heavier every single day you don't say it. Maybe it's simply showing up one more day to a life that hasn't paid you back yet for any of the effort you've already put in, and choosing to believe without proof that it eventually will. Here's what Thermopylae actually teaches you. Once you strip away the spears, the sea, and the sand, and look at the bones of it. First, you don't need thousands of people on your side. Leonidas didn't win with numbers, he never had them. He won, even in losing, by choosing the one piece of ground where his discipline mattered more than his disadvantage did. So stop waiting for the odds to improve, for the resources to show up, for the right moment when everything finally lines up in your favor. Find the version of your fight where your consistency is the actual advantage, not your talent, not your luck, not who you know. That is your narrow pass. Everyone has one, if they're honest enough to go looking for it, instead of waiting for an easier battlefield that was never going to arrive. Second, you don't need to win today for today to matter. Thermopylae was, on paper, a total military defeat, and it became the exact reason Greece went on to win the war a year later. Your hard morning, your rejected pitch, your relapse and the getting back up afterward, your unglamorous rep number 4012 that nobody will ever see or know about. None of it might look like a win today. It is very likely still the precise thing that makes the real win, later, even possible. Stop demanding that every difficult day pay you back immediately, in a currency you can see right now. Some days, all you're doing is building the evidence that eventually convinces the rest of you this was always possible. And third, the one people resist hearing the most. You do not get to wait until you're no longer afraid. Nobody standing in that pass stopped being afraid. Not Leonidas, not Dinex, not one of the 700 thespians who chose to stay knowing exactly what it meant. They simply built, through years of repetition nobody else ever saw or applauded, a version of themselves fear could no longer get all the way through to reach. That is available to you too. It was never a personality trait some people are born with and others aren't. It is a rep count. It is what you have actually practiced, quietly, on the days nobody was watching and nothing was on the line yet. So here is the only question that's actually left, and it's the only one that has ever mattered. What is the thing you have been quietly retreating from for months, for years, maybe for most of your adult life, that you are going to stop retreating from, starting with your very next decision today? So stand up. Not tomorrow, not Monday, not after one more sign, one more piece of proof, one more person telling you it's going to work out. Right now, in whatever room you happen to be standing in while you hear this, decide that today is the day you stop being the version of yourself who waits for permission that was never going to come. Hold the line in your health. The workout you almost skipped because you were tired, when tired was never actually the real reason. The food you almost let slide just this once, knowing it's never really just once. The sleep you almost sacrificed for one more hour of scrolling through other people's highlight reels instead of building one of your own. Hold it. Hold the line in your work. The project you almost shelved the first time it got difficult, telling yourself it wasn't the right timing. The pitch you almost didn't send because rejection felt more certain than sending it. The skill you almost stopped practicing the moment progress got slow and boring, forgetting that slow and boring is what mastery actually looks like from the inside every single time. Hold it. Hold the line in your relationships. The hard conversation you keep almost having, the apology you keep almost giving, the person you keep almost choosing fully instead of halfway. Hold it there too, because most people don't lose the people who matter to them in one dramatic moment. They lose them one almost at a time, over years, until there's simply nothing left to hold. And hold the line in who you are when absolutely nobody is watching. The promise to yourself you almost broke quietly, in a moment where no one on earth would ever have known but you. Hold it there, more than anywhere else, because that particular version of the line is the one that actually decides every other line you just heard. 300 men held a mountain pass for 2 full days against an army that made surrender the only reasonable choice available to them. You are being asked to hold a pass against an alarm clock, against a bad habit you've had for years, against the simple fear of being seen trying something and failing at it in front of people who might judge you for it. It is not remotely the same size of fight. It is the exact same fight. Hold the line today, then hold it again tomorrow when it's harder, because it always gets harder before it gets easier. Then hold it again after that, and the day after that, not because one single day of holding it is going to change your entire life. It won't. But 1,000 ordinary days of holding it, stacked one on top of another, without fanfare, without anyone carving your name into anything, that is the only thing that ever actually has. You are going to die. Someday, not today. And precisely because that's true, because none of us are given an unlimited number of passes to hold in this life, the only question that was ever actually going to matter is what you did with the ones you were given, on the ordinary days nobody else was watching. 300 men chose theirs at a narrow gap between a mountain and the sea, 2,500 years ago, and we are still, to this day, saying their name out loud. Nobody is going to carve yours into stone. There will be no epitaph, no ancient historian writing down what you did today for people to read centuries from now. But you get to decide, starting with the very next choice you make after this video ends, not tomorrow, not Monday, the next one, whether you are building a life that would have been worth telling anyone about at all. This is Spartan Protocol. Go hold your line.